How's it going today? How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. I'm doing pretty good. Yourself?
Doing good, doing good. You're going to be one of the mentors for our action adventure competition. Our community consists of, mostly a lot of people who are very new to the craft, people who are really just getting started in the industry, people who have maybe written one screenplay, maybe they haven't even written a screenplay yet. And so I always kind of like to keep these interviews a little bit focused on like, what tips, what advice do you have for those people who are really just getting started? I always like to ask this question first. I find it interesting, I don't know, to get a little bit of insight into, do you remember or what is the thing very early on for you, like the seed that was planted for you that made you realize or made you decide that this is what you wanted to do with your life? Like this is what you wanted to pursue. Like what is that thing that made you really get drawn to this?
Um, I was an only child. I moved
Mhm.
quite a bit. We moved between different cities and different homes and apartments. And I played make-believe. I used to just make up stories and have imaginary friends. And I kept myself really busy um, telling stories to myself and acting out the different characters and the voices. And so I don't know that at that time I was like, oh, I'm gonna do this particular thing. But I certainly have been telling stories since I can remember. And so I think that
Wow.
is fundamental to who I am. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. So it's like in your DNA, like storytelling is like a part of who you are. That's awesome. And that's something I kind of see like as a common factor for a lot of people who are successful. It's like just a part of who they are. But do
Mhm.
you remember like how did it go from that to actually screenwriting? Like do you kind of have that, like what was like that trajectory when you really started like your first screenplay, like that experience of when you really started getting into it?
Yeah. So I went to Berkeley and it's not a film school, and I had no idea that I was gonna, take up this career um, until about halfway through my freshman year. And at that point, I was like, I think I wanna make movies. And I was at the wrong school because it's not the guy that's not
Yeah.
really the school for it. So I went to a bookstore and I bought Sid Field's screenplay book, and I started writing scripts. And
Mm.
I have a pretty consistent motor, and so I just kept writing them until I had something that I was comfortable showing someone. And so I wrote lots of scripts while I was in college, um, really just trying to feel the stories that I was putting down on paper and make them feel like movies had always made me feel. So that was where it started. It's Sid Field's fault.
Wow, man. Well, that's a book that definitely comes up a lot. It's one of those like famous books that a lot of screenwriters get into. But that's so you're like self-taught. You really just dug into it yourself. And do you have any tips for someone who is maybe they're working on their first screenplay right now? Something that comes up a lot is voice, like your voice as an individual. And it's kind of something I like to hear a little bit about. Like, do you have any advice or any tips on how writers can try to approach figuring out the stories that they want to tell? Kind of like what you were just talking about, figuring out what it is that you want to put down on the page. Like, any tips or any advice for people who are working on that first script?
Absolutely. I think each of us has a point of view based on our life experience. And if you lean into who you are, you lean into what you have, what your experience has been, you will have the most authentic voice you can have. And it doesn't have to, and I don't mean like, oh, because I'm from this particular place. I can't do sci-fi because I didn't come from a sci-fi world. It's the humanity of who you are. It's the person that you are. It's the relationships that you might have had in your life that you can find the humanity in. You can find the human journey, the human experience in, and then you use yourself. You use your instrument to tell your story. and to speak to the story that whatever it is that you're trying to write. And I think that is, that's the advice that I would give, because the one thing you have that each of us has that no one else has is our experience. And so that
Yeah.
will make you unique. And oftentimes people are looking for a unique, specific voice. And each of us has that. And so, it's really about not being afraid of that. Sometimes I
Yeah.
think uh, writers may want to sound like someone else. I want to write a movie like da da da. And you obviously have we all have admire, people we admire and storytellers we admire, but you are you're the gold. You're what you have to offer the most. So I would say that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's like you hear, I love, write what you know. Obviously, it's like just one of the things everyone talks about. And it is misconstrued sometimes, but it's like you said, it's not about literally writing like your life, what you know, but the humanity of it, like tapping into yourself. Something I like to ask about too is, what do you think the importance of like self-awareness is for actually honing in on your stories and figuring out what you want to write? Like becoming more aware of yourself, like your own psychology, your own spirit. Like, do you think that's something that writers should try to be conscious of and work on?
I think writers and directors and actors and people and all of us, self-awareness is a valuable human tool, a valuable tool for society. And it certainly is valuable when you're in a creative, as a creative and a storyteller, because the more you can kind of tap into who you are and understand who you are, you can process that and work through it with the whatever, whether you're an actor, whether you're a director, whether you're a writer, whatever it is that you your art is, having that access and being able to access that is valuable. You
Yeah.
also know your blind spots, and you know your
Yeah.
strengths, and you like all of that is just it helps you to be able to understand when you get notes from somebody where your blind spots are, where your strong points are, and how those things can help you to present the best version of whatever it is you're working on. So
Yeah. Do you find that writing is kind of a therapeutic process for you? Like, do you find yourself working through your own kind of issues or day-to-day things, like metaphorically in your work? That's definitely something that comes up in these interviews sometimes. It's like writing can be like therapy for some people.
it is interesting. It's yeah, because it's very personal. The best work I've done is always very personal work. It's always exploring something you feel. I mean, Black Panther is this feeling of never seeing yourself on the big screen as a little kid, and wanting the
Yeah.
wish fulfillment of being a superhero, and then the idea of the connectivity or the disconnectivity between Africa, the continent, and the diaspora in Africa. Like all these things are things you feel
Yeah.
in you growing up with that kind of stuff, and being able to pour that into a story and use those feelings and thoughts and the questions you have, within yourself. Just being able to kind of explore those things. Exploring fatherhood and sons, and like all of these different things are, you're taking who you are, and you're working through that in a creative medium. And
Yeah. I love hearing. I always love doing these, and it always gets me inspired hearing people talk about this stuff. Like, yeah, it's validating. Like we're all kind of having the same experience with working on our screenplays. So okay, one question, something I would love to talk about a little bit. I mean, we're already running out of time. I could listen to you talk about this stuff forever, but I'd like to maybe talk a little bit about theme, because you worked on movies that I think are like beautifully balanced with like high concept themes that are powerful themes, like relevant to our culture, but very nuanced and really intricate characters. And I'm kind of just curious about your philosophy of, do you focus on theme when you're writing? Is that something that I've noticed there's kind of a divide sometimes of people who like don't think about theme at all. They just kind of focus maybe on just character. But then there are other people who kind of lead with theme first. And I'm just kind of curious about your philosophy.
I'm the latter. I'm a theme person. I start with what is this? What is it that I'm exploring? And that from that I find what is you find your theme because it's what is the question? What is the thing that is scratching at you and causing you to want to explore this particular story? Again, Black Panther is "Am I my brother's keeper?" Right? So it's this idea of like, how do you take care? Like you start with that, and then you go, oh, that's the crux of where T'Challa and Killmonger, their struggle between, and we apply that theme to these two countries, and we apply it to a real life circumstance versus a fantasy circumstance. And you're playing, but you're playing with what that is. You're playing with the two brothers and T'Challa's father and his brother, and are we taking care of each other? Like all of these things that are, again, a part of our regular life experience. So then you take that theme, at least for me, you take that theme and you start to then work through what a narrative would be. What is the story? How do we play? How are we telling the story to make the audience feel this journey that we're, trying to take them on? And the characters come out of that for me. The characters, like what characters work within the parameters of this kind of journey. Why do you choose this person versus another person, another type of person to tell a story? Because there's an infinite versions of individuals, and so how are you narrowing it in on the kind of person you want to explore? So that's usually that's how I work, but it commingles because sometimes there's just really interesting character journeys that you want to explore, and so
Yeah.
it's interwoven in a certain way. But I'm a theme person. I have to know why I'm telling a story for me to really be able to access the
So when you're like coming on board as a collaboration, is that the thing that attracts you to commit to like a certain project is like the theme of it, or figuring out what that theme might be when you first start like looking into a project you're going to start working on?
I'm usually, it's like it's a little more organic than that. It's like what excites me. Some things, it's instinct too, right? It's like some things excite you and some things don't, and
Yeah.
so I'm a curious person, so I'm often interested in things that I don't know about. And to some degree, like subject matter I don't know about. And not like the journey, but like, a NASA's flight to blah, blah, blah. It's like, oh, I'm really curious about that. What's the human journey in that story? Like, what is that? Or um, I think that's the best way to say it. So it's it could be any sort of thing that would catch my attention, or the type of movies I like to watch. I like crime stories. I
Yeah.
like espionage stories. Those are movies that like get my attention as a viewer, as a fan, and so I'm going to be drawn to stuff like that at times as well. But um, you never know. You never know. It's interesting. So the
Yeah, man.
human,
I think that
we're a jumble of all sorts of things, man.
100%. I honestly think that really is the best advice. Like you got to find what you're really interested in. I was actually just watching an interview with Robert Greene talking. He has a new book, and he's like literally exactly what you were just saying. He was talking about how important it is, like that at the lowest moments of your life, even finding like retapping into those things in childhood, those things that really you were so interested in that light you up. That's just one of the most important things you can do. So I think that's like the best advice. Actually, and you're talking a little bit about how you're interested in crime stories. I watched an interview with you on DP30, the Oral History of Hollywood. And it's so interesting. You were talking about how you wrote a spec of like a Chinatown kind of vibe movie, and that's what got you into the Marvel Writers Program. I know we're like running out of time, but do you mind talking maybe like a minute about just kind of that, how you went from like how that experience, like getting into that Marvel Writers Program? I'd just love to hear a little bit about it.
It's sure. I'm happy to tell you. So I had written my specs had been smaller before that because I was wanting to direct them, and I'm like, I want to direct, so I'm gonna write something that's contained and small. My aspiration is to do big movies, and so I didn't have any material to show, and so I wrote this thing, and I loved Chinatown's obviously fantastic movie. LA has such an interesting history and the dynamics of the city, and so I wrote something that spoke to me in a modern context. It was about a police lieutenant, a black police lieutenant who was a conservative guy. And he's in the LAPD and just like kind of really playing with his character, and there's all this corruption and really playing with like a different version of like a black cop that you would see. And
Sounds really
I enjoyed writing it. It was a really interesting journey. But so it was my spec. It became my big spec, in quotes. And Marvel saw it. An executive, Nate Moore, saw it, read it, and we had a meeting, and we sat down and we started talking, and we both we hit it off really well. He said, "Oh, we're gonna be doing a roadie movie, a movie for War Machine, and would you be interested in pitching for that?" And I was like, "Sure." And sometimes when you're talking to executives, they say stuff and it doesn't come to fruition. But sure enough, a couple months later, they sent me the materials, and I pitched for another month and a half, all the way up to Kevin Feige, and then I won that job. So I won the War Machine job. And I was all excited, I hadn't had any big jobs, and so I was all excited. And then 2 weeks later, they were like, the guy who's doing Iron Man 3 wants War Machine to have a big part in that movie, and so we can't do a War Machine movie until we know what's going to happen. So sorry, we're not going to do that movie. And they go, but would you be interested in our writer program? I had no idea what that was. And they told me what it was, and it was an awesome program. It's like a development deal. You get yourself an office, and you essentially just get they give you a character, you read all the comics, and you pitch them a movie, and then they greenlight you to write the script. It's just like if you were kind of getting hired to just do the job. You get notes from those same executives. And so I did that for a couple of years, and it was fantastic. It was a fantastic experience. I grew as a writer. I feel very, very fortunate to have been able to be in that program.
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting to me. Like that, it's a perfect testament to what you were saying earlier about writing what you love. That this like little spec that you wrote, which was very specific to you, what you love, what you're interested in, got you into one of the biggest studio programs, like just what that does kind of the opposite movies in a sense, these huge grand movies, but it was that personal thing that you wrote that is what landed you there. Script must have been amazing. I'd love to read it. Like, and was it ever made into a movie?
No, never made into a movie.
That's really interesting.
I try to dive. I sometimes talk about dusting it off and taking a look at it. It would be it's a cool LA crime story. So,
Yeah.
maybe one day, maybe one day.
Well, okay, maybe final question here. I know we went over time. I appreciate it. I appreciate your time. This is a question we're kind of asking everyone. And just a forewarning, it's like one of those questions, like there's not really one answer. There's not really an answer to it. But, with all the challenges right now in this industry, the past couple of years, so much is changing. And there's just so much going on in this industry. And with all the streamers and all the different opportunities and challenges writers are facing, what advice do you have, like specific advice do you have for someone who is truly committed to actually wanting to see their work on the big screen? Someone who's committed to really seeing their work come to fruition. Like, do you have any specific advice for that person who's, in that position where they are ready to do whatever it takes?
I think I mean, this is going to sound, I mean, I'm sure I'm not the only one who would say something like this, but it really does come down to, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. If
Mm.
you really, if you really are committed to what you want to do, and it is storytelling, it is about doing the work, staying at the work, not, a lot of times people, oh, I started a script and then I rewrote the first act. Oh, and I rewrote. You have to get through a script, then
Yep.
revise the script, do another script, keep going, keep going, keep going, because the more you write, the better your writing will be. That is one thing. When I was in college, I wrote a lot of scripts on my own and I became a better writer. No one saw my first script. I didn't sell my first script. It was several scripts down the line once you really have the craft. And because what will happen is, you'll have an opportunity if people read what you have and they think it's good. And the way to become good, it's the same muscle memory you use if you're an athlete and so on and so forth. You got to do the job. And so, and not expect the first thing you put down to be the thing that's going to end up on the screen. Not saying it can't happen, but expect that you're going to have to keep at it. And then if it happens sooner, that's awesome. But that would be the advice I would give, is if you really are committed, then really be committed and know that, like, you have to, it's a job where you have to have faith in yourself, because, you're alone writing oftentimes, or with your writing partner, and then you're handing this thing over that you poured yourself into, and everyone has an opinion because they're subjective, and that's normal, and you got to just be
Yeah.
able to keep at it. So that's what I would
Yeah.
say. I know that's probably, you know, not probably the most like newest answer to that
I mean,
question, but that is the
on,
one.
yeah, it's honestly the best advice. It's like we all need that reminder that it is a marathon and we can't be impatient. And if I love the way you said it. If you're committed, be committed. Like that is the best piece of advice you can really give. So anyway, I really appreciate it. This was great, and there's a lot of good stuff in here. Thank you.
My pleasure. My pleasure. All right. Take care now.